Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome. Nice to have you here at the Church of Jesus the Good Shepherd here in Monroe, and we're going to continue our conversation all about the Shroud of Turin. You may recall back in February, the beginning of Lent, we spoke so much about, we had 3 nights in a row in which we talked all about the Shroud and what is the Shroud, how to read the Shroud. When you look at the Shroud here, this is the negative image of the actual negative of the shroud. What do I mean by that? For those of you who weren't there, remember the shroud, the image on the shroud that we see in the church and in other places, it itself is a negative image. And so when you take a picture of the negative, you get the negative of the negative, so this produces the positive. And when in 1898, Secunda Pia, and that's our, where is that? Sorry? There we go. The first photograph over there, all about the shroud. When all of a sudden they took that and they had the negative plate and he saw it, and with that type of an image, I mean, it really shocked the world, so much so that they said, it's a fake. You forged it. This is not right. And until it was done a second time in 1931, and they got the same results and they watched the whole thing, then they realized how authentic it was. But that really is what pushed us into the whole scientific realm of shroud studies. Before, the medieval pilgrim just took the word of the bishop who said this is the burial cloth, and therefore the pilgrim would get down on his or her knees and go forward and venerate it because the bishop said so, and therefore it was. Well, now the more scientific mind comes into play here, and now science is being, so many studies have gone into trying to figure out what this image is and how it was created. That's going to be a big part of our talk this morning, how it was created. And so, some of you were here on Good Friday when we commemorate the death of our Lord. And so my presentation, an hour and a half, was all about how the shroud is a perfect mirror of the Gospels. The Gospel says that he was crucified with nails. Well, the shroud says, okay, there's a big gaping wound right there in the wrist. There's a large amount of blood and serum that had come out right there on this side, right between the 5th and the 6th ribs. There was evidence of scourging. There was evidence of something that pierced all around, not just around the top of the head, but even the top of the head. So like a helmet of thorns. So we really spoke in terms of the passion of our Lord as evident in the shroud. I mean, nowadays, we take it for granted that a forensic team can swoop into a crime scene and take a look at every little detail and find one little strand of hair and be able to convict someone, you know? So we talked about it, you might remember, we framed it in terms of CSI Jerusalem. The case of the missing body. It was stolen, right? I mean, we have a tomb. There was a body there the day before. It's gone. What happened? So imagine all of the modern science being put into trying to figure out this particular case. Well, today we're framing it in a different way. Today is May the 4th. And you're thinking to yourself, May the 4th be with you. You're thinking of Star Wars. I know. But today, we have our Shroud Wars in a galaxy far away, you know? So we have the Shroud Wars, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, how hokey can they be? But there are actually Shroud Wars going on, because there are 2 dominant theories as to the image formation. Complementary, overlapping in many ways, but also at odds with one another. We're going to talk about those. It's really super fascinating, especially if you have a physicist's mind and you're able to kind of grasp these huge numbers with regards to energy that, at least on paper, we can figure out, but at no point are we humanly capable of being able to produce this type of energy. Right now, by the way, there's a $1 million reward to anyone who can figure out how to create an image on a linen piece of cloth that is on the 7 top fibrils of the cloth all the way down, with no pigments, no painting, no scorching, How was this created? $1 million reward. And when I say fibrils, by the way, you have one thread, and then you have each thread has 100 fibers, and each fiber has 100 fibrils. So, we're talking about the very, 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 very top surface of the shroud, which if you got a razor blade and you just kind of went like this, you can just scratch the image straight off of it. So we want to talk about the shroud wars in this term, in this sense, because of the two prevailing theories with regards to the image formation and all that has to go into this being an authentic image having been created. Image, keep that in mind, image. And then also with regards to the dating of the shroud. There are all different types of wars with regards to the dating of the shroud. 1988, the carbon dating that took place. Well, that's already been debunked. The carbon dating was perfect. It was perfect. It's a great scientific tool. But it was taken from a piece of the shroud where there had been a reweave of cotton because of the fire that had taken place in 1532. And 2 years later, these nuns are reweaving, and they took it from that, and they, so the carbon dating was actually perfect, but there are other ways in which to date organic material such as this. So a good number of you were at the Mass earlier this morning, and I explained this particular Greek word, graphe, graphane, to write. So if we think of that and we put it in terms of English, think of a graph, all right? You got a graph, you plot it, and you put all of this. So we can think of graph paper, et cetera, et cetera. We can think of a biography, autobiography, therefore, an epigraph, a telegraph, all of this different stuff. But if we say graphic in terms of graphic arts, that means, okay, someone is using a hand or nowadays modern technology to create something that is visual and that I can now show to you. Or if I say that something, we have a really graphic description of something, well, you don't see anything, but I have so painted the picture for you that it's there, it's vivid, it's in your mind. Okay, wow, okay, I get it. Well, St. Paul chooses that word in Galatians 3, verse 1, when he writes, and we heard that in today's first reading, because today's a feast of the Holy Shroud. Oh, stupid Galatians. That's how it starts. Who has bewitched you, before whose eyes Jesus Christ was publicly portrayed, there's the graphos right in there, as crucified. Now, nowhere does it say, okay, that equals the shroud, as we call it, the Shroud of Turin. But what else could it have meant? Why does the church give us this reading on the Feast of the Holy Shroud, if not to help us make that connection, that at least at some point there was a graphic portrayal of Jesus, and especially in the context of the resurrection, it's no longer Christ, it's no longer I who live, but the risen Christ who lives in me, etc., etc., etc. So graphos, image formation, that's where we're going to go from here. In the Mass, in the Creed, what do we say? God from God, light from light. All right, what did they mean in the year 325 when they spoke about that? Or, we come before you in the light of your face, as we said in the Eucharistic prayer number 2 today. So this whole talk we could really take off with it on a theological, philosophical point of view. We're going to stick more to the science of it. So I hope you get a lot out of this, find it fascinating. You'll see how there are shroud wars even to this day. Part 3, though, is the nice, just bringing it all together. And this is a type conversation that we will have, that we are definitely hoping to have interaction. So if we say something and you're like, okay, I don't quite really understand what that means, we really need for you to tell us. Raise your hand, ask questions. We will have 2 different breaks between the 3 periods. And so just to make sure everyone knows how to read the shroud. So you see the shroud, but you also see these bright lines right down the middle. So it was folded in such a way that the fold was not on the actual image of the body. They wanted to protect the image. They had a good sense of that. But then it was folded again and folded yet again. And so you see 8 sets of patches, those really super bright things that you see, is where the fire got so hot that it melted the silver container, and it created the scorch marks that you see, but also it burned through the shroud in such a way that we needed to have patches put on. At the same time that there was a reweave and this big backing that was put onto the back of the shroud to be able to protect it. And so you see on one side, so it would be on this side, you see the face of Jesus. I hope everyone can see it clearly, and how his body and his feet go all the way here. But then you have the back of his head and the back of his arm. So the image formation, how is it that the image could have been created? Notice we don't see his sides. Why do we not see the side of Jesus in a cloth that would have gone around him? And when I say around him, this is a representation of, and actually this is a shroud image right here. His face is here. Someone would have been enshrouded like this, so that at the moment of the resurrection, his face would be here. So that at the moment of the resurrection, we have the image of Jesus, both the dorsal, the backside, and also the front. At some point during the little breaks, you're more than welcome to go into our church. And if you haven't seen the 14.5-foot replica, very good replica of the Shroud of Turin, it's on linen cloth with the same weave, the herringbone weave, a 3/1 weave. It's a very good replica. But also from the shroud, all that we find, all of the blood, all of the bruising, everything that the scientists and medical experts tell us that is on the shroud has been placed onto the cross. We have the actual cross, the crucifix. This is called a syndonic, syndone in Latin for shroud, so a syndonic cross. Every detail that you see on this crucifix is placed there because you see it on the shroud. Everything here is a perfect representation, with one exception, the loincloth. You know, our sensibilities today, and even beginning in the Middle Ages, they always put a loin. Back then, he would have been scourged, crucified, without any clothing. He was stripped of his clothing, as we know. And so the scourging would have taken place from kind of his waist down. They didn't want to scourge too hard across the chest. It might bring about cardiac arrest. And the Romans didn't want him to die quickly. You know, the Romans were masters at torture. They knew how to make someone suffer. And that's exactly why you don't see many scourge marks. You do see some, but not many. You see the gaping wound right there. So like the Gospels tell us that he was pierced in the side, the Shroud tells us it was in the right side. So there are a lot of little things that the Shroud informs us about with regards to the passion, death, and resurrection. Now we're ready for power and light. The responsorial psalm today was, the Lord reveals to the nations his saving power. What does sacred scripture mean when we talk about power, or when we speak of the light of the resurrection? Power is a great word. I love the word. The Greek word is dunamis. All right, dunamis. We get some great English words. Dynamic, dynamo, dynamite. So the power we're talking about is not, just my power to be able to talk or something. No, I mean power. I mean in the real sense of it. What does sacred scripture have in mind when we speak about power? So now, it's great that we can speak about, obviously we're going to have to speak about the wounds of Jesus Christ in this particular conversation this morning, but we're going to get to speak so much about the resurrection. The resurrection, what does the Shroud of Turin tell us about Jesus and the power and light? Think in terms of the transfiguration, and he becomes brilliantly bright as light, such as no fuller on earth could. How is it? How is it that for down through the centuries, people speak of the saints in terms of some type of a glow, a light emanating from them, so much so that in art, they started to be depicted with a halo. What is this light that can emanate from a person? So, with that as an introduction, my final little quote will be from a quote some of you have heard before. It'll take us from the passion to the resurrection. The cross of Christ received the body of Jesus alive and gave him back to us dead. The shroud received the body of Jesus dead and gave him back to us alive. So now I wish to introduce Dr. Cheryl White, who is my partner in, I almost said crime, but that's not right. But I mean, we talk about this all the time. We will be going to Indianapolis for the Eucharistic Congress that is taking place there. They want us to speak all about the shroud there. Dr. Cheryl White was in Portugal for World Youth Day to speak to the hundreds of thousands of people as it was simultaneously being translated, and all the geofencing and the things that we were sending out to all of the kids who were there in that area. And the people of Turin, they want the two of us to go to speak in Turin. I mean, the Shroud of Turin, that's where so many experts themselves are, and the collection that we have. I know a number of you have already seen a number of those items in the collection, and it continues to fascinate. If we have time, we can talk more about that. Dr. Cheryl White,
thank you.
Tell us about the power and the light.
Power and the light. Good morning, everybody. I do want to tell you that, just sort of give you some perspective about something else that I think that those of us in the shroud world kind of lose this perspective. There is more interest in this cloth today than there has been in over 40 years. This particular linen is receiving more attention, even beginning to in the secular media a little bit. There's several Hollywood films that are in process of being produced about this right now. And again, more interest, I think, than we've seen in a very long time. And it's precisely because of what we are beginning to know more and more about it scientifically. So really what I want to do, it's going to be three parts to this, and I know Father Peter's jumping in and out of this morning, but we'll be talking a little bit in this first part about image formation, then that's the first Shroud War, and then in the second, we'll be looking at dating the cloth, how we've come up with the date range that we have, and some very exciting new information about that I think is very compelling. And then the points of agreement, what our scientific sort of consensus is right now. So I want to begin by talking about first things first. We need to just at least lay a baseline of what it is that science does, okay, what science as a discipline does. Because I have heard through the years of teaching on the Shroud, I've often heard this said to me, well, don't you think that science can prove the resurrection? Let me tell you what's wrong with that statement, in case you haven't already put that together. Science cannot do what science does not do. Science does not extend into the supernatural. Science is not going to prove a resurrection event. It is not subject to scientific proof. Because why? Science is a natural measure. It measures natural phenomena. That's what it does. So I think that it's helpful to have this foundation to know that science makes some assumptions. One key assumption is that every effect has a cause. You got that? Every effect has a cause. So what science seeks to do is to find the truth about that. Can you not hear me? Is that better? Okay. Science seeks to find the truth about that, to find, in other words, find that cause of the effect. And it uses a very rigorous method. So, I mean, for us, all of us who ever had to do a science fair project, or parents, if you ever did a science fair project for your child, because that's usually the way that works, then you know that there is that rigorous scientific method, and we can thank Sir Francis Bacon for that, really, from the 15th, 16th century, who developed a rigorous method of coming to the truth. All of science is based on that. So this scientific method has been used for the study of this cloth from every single discipline. All of the hard sciences have used this method to look at this cloth. And I think that that's where today we have an opportunity to talk about something that is obviously the effect. The effect is the image. Yeah, the effect is the image that we see on the cloth. The cloth, the cause of the image is what science seeks to answer, okay? So can we be very clear about that relationship, cause and effect relationship? Science seeks to find the cause of what we see as the effect. But again, the limit of science is to the natural realm. So we cannot expect it to answer a supernatural question, which requires a response of the heart and not the mind. So that's kind of, I hope we'll leave that a little bit today. So for instance, we know a lot about its environmental journey. We know, as Father mentioned, CSI Jerusalem. We know where it has been in its history. We know a lot about the blood of the man who was wrapped in it. We know the wounds he suffered. We know a lot about the textile, and even today we know a lot more about the textile than we did before. Only in one instance do we see a clear violation of scientific protocol, a clear violation of scientific method. Only once. And you'll see it in the second part of this presentation. It's a question that begs, why would science do anything less than to try to be objective in finding the truth, if in fact this is what science is supposed to do? Yes? So, our image formation challenges. Let's talk about that. First of all, the challenge is there are at least 17 image formation characteristics that must be met. For those of you that are interested, I'm going to make a commercial plug. The book over there, the Critical Summary, was put together by Dr. John Jackson, who led the team to Turin in 1978 for the only time the cloth has ever been scientifically examined. He put together that summary in which he identifies these 17 image characteristics. In other words, if you're going to put together a project to create this in your garage, okay, then you've got to match all 17 of these image characteristics. That $1 million challenge is out there. They'll even give you the linen. The British Museum will give you the linen. All right? If you can do it. 17 image characteristics that have to be met. So the examples, some of those, one of these I think Father Peter already mentioned, there you can't see any side views of the man. That's one of the important image characteristics. You can't see that. You see a frontal and dorsal. The front and back of the head, when you look at it, appear to be like connected, don't they? Okay? That's a specific image characteristic that has to be explained if you're going to be looking for the cause of this effect. The superficiality of the image that Father Peter mentioned. The depth of it, you can literally scrape off with a razor blade. The fact that the blood was present before the image, that's another characteristic that you have to match in order to explain the process. So we really have two explanations, really. They sort of compete of this cause and effect, the cause of the effect, and they both involve light. They both involve light. Both of them are theoretical physics. Both of them. Okay, so everybody got their little handout that we did this morning? There's some nice images on there for you. That actually, each one of these photographs is designed to speak to a different image characteristic. The one on the top right is more theoretical. The other two are actual measurements we have based on light. Both of these, though, are based on physical science, even though they cannot be reproduced in a laboratory setting. Okay, here's a challenge, people. It's a challenge. Physicists have computed, they know the amount of light energy that was required to create this image. There's two very different competing ideas about how it happened, but they both involve light. The challenge is that the light that is involved is enough that could have and should have destroyed the city of Jerusalem. We're talking about that much light in such intensity in such a brief period of time, but yet it didn't. And it didn't only not do that, the image on the cloth is not even a scorch, it's not heat. So this is the challenge for theoretical physics. Light. Can we talk about light for just a moment? Light is a natural phenomenon, isn't it? Right? But it is the first creative act of God. Y'all go back to Genesis. The first thing God speaks, let there be light. Let there be light. And then, if you read that entire Genesis narrative in chapter 1, what you realize is that God separates light from darkness. Okay? Challenge y'all to go back and read that. Because light, of course, is the only thing that dispels darkness. Darkness does not exist as a positive identity. It doesn't exist by itself. It exists in the absence of light. Does that make sense? So light, being God's first creative act, is actually just to separate the darkness, which was the void before he created anything. Are y'all tracking me? Light. Light from light. Light is the only thing that can come from light. Okay? So, in the case of the shroud, light behaves in a way that we cannot reproduce. So we've got two theories here. The cloth collapse hypothesis of Dr. John Jackson, who Father Peter and I both know. He is he's the one that put the book together. He led the team to Turin. He has worked on this every single day since 1978. I have been at conferences with him and watched him scribbling into notebooks with symbols and numbers that don't make any sense to me, but he works on this frantically, trying to answer this theoretical question. And his theory is that, hypothesis, I shouldn't say it's a theory, he would tell me quickly scientific theory is a law. His hypothesis is this, that the body in the cloth became itself pure light. And a light of this intensity I talked about in this brief millisecond, immeasurable millisecond, the body becomes actually transparent. So the body has no mass because it is light, but it still has all the form of a man. Make sense? So, because of that, the cloth simply collapsed through the body, he says, along the plane of gravity, straight through the plane of gravity, because there's nothing to prevent the cloth from collapsing. That explains all 17 of those image characteristics, by the way. Explains why you don't see the side of the body. It explains why the top of the head seems to be connected. The light intensity, he says, caused the very top fibrils of the linen to dehydrate. In other words, the contact of the light with those top fibrils causes a chemical change in them that retains all of the information about the body, including all of the complexity of every single wound in just that millisecond. And when you think about it, we've talked about this before. If you came to the Lenten mission, I know we talked about this, and we may be able to mention it in the third session today. There is a direct proportional relationship between the image density and the distance from the body. Direct proportional relationship. This allows us to know the exact position of the body at the time the image was formed, which is right here. This forensic model is extracted from that information. On your card, what you're looking at right there on the left, that is created from the VP8 analyzer. That's the body in light that was extracted from that 3D analysis done in 1976. So that explains all of the image characteristics. The other sort of competing idea about this is something that's been called dimensional displacement. And I am going to tell you this qualifier right up front, that, do y'all know I was a humanities major? Does everybody know that? I'm convinced that God just didn't give me the gift of understanding math because he knew I would be too powerful if I had that too. So a lot of this just eludes me, okay? So Father Peter, you feel free to jump in up here anytime you'd like, all right? On dimensional displacement of the body. So Dr. Robert Rucker, who is a physicist as well, a nuclear physicist, has a hypothesis that what actually happened is that the body in the cloth disintegrated at the molecular level. Think about, the thing that comes closest to my mind is like from Star Trek when we used to beam people up and down. You displace their molecules across the galaxy or whatever. But not quite like that. His hypothesis is that the atomic level, the body dematerializes. It enters what we call the fourth dimension, which is not accessible. I've got a nodding head. You are the person that the teacher lives for. He's nodding, yes. That there is a dimension that is inaccessible to our senses, that we do not see or perceive, we cannot know, see, touch, smell, taste, whatever. But that it exists. And that fourth dimension is outside of time and space. So with a body now that is reconstituted in this fourth dimension outside of time and space, Jesus can, for instance, walk through walls, show up in places just out of nowhere, right? In his post-resurrection appearances. Dr. Rucker says that such a transformation, the ability to move from fourth dimension into the three-dimensional time-space reality, is actually, he thinks, the best explanation for this, because at the subatomic level, what this would have required is a massive effect of light. A light that would have been emitted at the moment that this happened with the dematerialization of the body. So he uses that explanation, an atomic change that emits kind of this brilliant light of radiation. So we know this is theoretical. We've known about quantum physics for a while. I mean, this is something that that actually, when you think about knowing that there's a dimension where the laws of nature do not apply, we've known about that since the early 20th century, right? Do I have any physics majors in here? I do? You're nodding. Are you a physics major? Okay, good. I did speak at length with a physicist friend of mine this past week about this, and she tried to guide me in the right direction. So that we know that there is this reality that we cannot access with our senses. Quantum physics demonstrates that to us. We've known about it. Sir Isaac Newton actually suspected it. Albert Einstein actually was able to prove this in his theory of relativity, that there is something that is beyond time-space. So it explains how the body of Jesus would appear differently in his post-resurrection experiences. It explains why he would appear as someone that they do not recognize on the road to Emmaus, for instance, and that Mary Magdalene does not recognize. There is something about this transfiguration as well. So something that Father Peter and I have talked about a good bit over the last couple of days is we're so accustomed to speaking about the transfiguration, for instance, in Christian terms, that I think we miss something that's kind of important about that text. When we talk about light, transfiguration, that all of the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, interestingly, John doesn't record the transfiguration, which I'm kind of confused about since he was there, but maybe it's because he knew that the other three had already talked about it. But Matthew and Mark being the first to appear, Mark's gospel the first to be in circulation at the end of the first century, he uses a term, a word, to describe this transfiguration that had only previously ever been used in Greek mythology. It's the word that we have for metamorphosis. Okay? And this was something that the Greeks believed that the gods could do. So he uses that word. Matthew follows suit. Matthew uses the same word to describe this transfigured Jesus. So I think it's interesting that, and then Luke uses a word that means lightning flash, right? To describe this physical light change about Jesus. Both of these hypotheses involve light. So I want to leave you with one more thing about light, because this is something I've really kind of gotten into very much in the last, I would say, last year or so. I've been compelled to study more about light for several reasons. But do you know that there is something called particle-wave duality? Is that ringing a bell with anybody? Particle-wave duality. No? Okay. This is something that was suspected by Newton, proven by Einstein, that we now know. That light is both a wave and a particle. And sometimes it behaves as a wave, and sometimes it behaves as a particle. But at one level of our reality, it exists as both of those things simultaneously. So here's my physics question for you. So we just talked about it. In what dimension does light exist as both wave and particle at the same time? At our quantum level, the level we do not see, we cannot experience, it behaves as both a wave and a particle. So in case you haven't made this connection yet, and I don't blame you if you haven't, what that means, Einstein asked the question, how can this be? How can this be? Because light is either wave or it is particle, but it should never be both. He said, and these were his words, it defies the foundational laws of physics for this to be true. Light has a dual nature. I'm going to let that settle for a minute. Light has a dual nature. Jesus has a dual nature. Right? So here's something else I think that's really, really interesting. The image disappears when you transmit light behind the shroud. If you were to put a light source behind the shroud and shine through it, the image disappears. Now you see the blood stains. The blood stains are there on the cloth. So you not only see the blood stains, they actually kind of cast a shadow, as everything does when it is lit. Everything in this world that is lit will cast a shadow. So the image can no longer be seen. If this were a painting, an artwork, a photograph, a drawing, whatever, then actually anything that is an image created by something other than light, it would be visible in transmitted light and it would cast a shadow. So I have the photographer actually who did this, Barry Schwartz. who was the documenting photographer on the Shroud of Turin research project in 1978, who, by the way, I would like to ask for some special prayers for him today. He is very unwell, so I just learned yesterday. But he took this photograph. He had the idea of transmitting light behind it to see what would happen. And these were his words to me when we were talking about this not long ago, when I got permission to use the image. And I said, but it's so fascinating to me that the image disappears in light. And he said, because the image is light. Light is the only thing that disappears in light itself. So that was a very profound observation from a photographer who happens to be Jewish, leaving us, I think, with an important question. You know, when we think, Father mentioned what we say in our creed, God from God, light from light, that the first creative act of God was light. And light can only come from light. So if he created light, he is light. Makes sense that we would say that in our creed. Is this not perhaps a physical remain to remind us of that reality? That it is light from light. Christ is light from light. So, I'm going to leave you with that. How am I doing on time, Father? What's mine? What's, oh! I'm accustomed to talking for 50 minutes, and you took like 15, so that's great. I'm really speedy today. So do we have time? You have a couple of questions. We can take a break right now, wander in and out, take some photographs if you'd like. I know that, Father, you have something you want to say? Come on up here. Questions?
What are the chances of another, like the 1978 examination of it? What are the chances of that happening again?
I think very good. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that in 1978 there were samples that were taken from the Shroud that had been preserved in some laboratories around the world. There's one here there's a lab here in the United States that has some. So there is still testing that's going on with permission of the Apostolic See through the Archbishop in Turin. Other samples have been asked to be returned, okay? But so there is still some testing that's being allowed right now, especially related to the blood, which we'll talk about in part 3, I believe. Yeah, but. No, the Pope owns the Shroud, and he has said, this Pope has said, there will be no more samples taken for testing.
But also in 1978, there are pictures of truckloads of equipment being brought from an airplane that took off from the United States of America and landed in Turin, and all of the different scientists of that time, the best of the best, and a good number of them not even Christian, were applying their discipline to the study of the Shroud. So Dr. Max Fry, for example, the world's leading pollenologist at the time, he said, okay, well, if this is an old piece of linen, we should be able to find some pollen in there. And I mean, it makes no sense to us today, but he actually got some Scotch tape, pressed it onto the Shroud, we'd never do that again, and pulled it up, and sure enough, he found these pollens, and one of these, right over there, banners talks about the different pollens. Here's the historical path that the Shroud took, so not surprisingly, we find pollens from all of these different places. Yeah, if this is a medieval forgery, someone would have had to say, oh, okay, pollens, they all are very unique, identify the actual species of the plant and where it's from, and we're going to have to sprinkle some pollens all over this Shroud so that when they figure out pollenology later, they will be able to, I will be able to trick them, fool them, you know, I mean, anyway, so, but I mean, to your point, Mike, We would love to see STURP 2, Shroud of Turin Research Project, Part 2, and to have all of the different scientific disciplines. I mean, everything that showed up in the back of this huge truck can probably fit on my iPhone now. You know, how great it would be to be able to research it. In 1978, it did not belong to the Pope. It belonged to the Savoy family.
That's right.
So it was in 1983 when Umberto II died, he willed it to Pope John Paul II and his successors. Everyone thinks that the Catholic Church has owned it, you know, for all these centuries. No, we've only owned it since 1983. And who knows, maybe the next Pope will say, I'm all for it, let's do it, STURP 2.
That's right.
Any other questions with regards to what we have spoken about thus far? Believe it or not, I have a wedding to go perform. So if you wish to go into the church right now, actually it's probably not a good idea. I'm going to take that back, what I was about to say. You know, run in there, but they're probably getting pictures and things like that right now. But after part 2, then I definitely want you to go in there. You're going to see me again in about 30 minutes. And then we want you to go into the church. What we will be doing after the presentation is taking that big 14.5 foot by 3.5 foot shroud replica from the church, putting it into the parish hall. And so a lot of people, you can really get up close, and we're going to hang it this way instead of it being standing like that. So that brings to conclusion part 1. Thank you very much. Please take some pictures, go around, take a look. If you wish to purchase any of those items, please feel free to do so. And we'll see you in about 10 minutes. Let's all agree, 10 minutes.
Perfect.
So 10:05, we will begin very promptly. Thank you.